Okay. Good evening. I hereby call to order the action session of the Board of School Commissioners for Thursday, November 19th. Would everyone please stand and join me in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will note, as I did on Tuesday night, we have two commissioners participating by phone pursuant to Governor Holcomb's executive orders and corresponding guidance from the Indiana Public Access Counselor. I will remind and ask my colleagues who are on the phone tonight, when not responding or asking questions, if you could mute your phones to minimize feedback or interference. And Mr. Mulholland, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold?
Present.
Commissioner Gore?
Present.
Commissioner Moore? Commissioner Slack?
Present.
Secretary Collins?
Present.
Vice President Hawkins?
Present.
President O'Connor?
Present. We'll now adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Reviewing the agenda, are there any requests for changes to the agenda as presented? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
The agenda is adopted. We do not have any special recognitions this evening, other than the special recognitions for our families who continue to regularly deal with the things that are thrown in front of us. So again, want to highlight the hard work of our teachers, our staff, our students, and the families. Moving to section 3, does any commissioner wish to offer opening comments this evening?
I have a comment, Commissioner Gore.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say tonight that I'm really concerned, I guess as everyone is, about the spike in this COVID-19. And as you can see, I take it literally. I just want to acknowledge everyone, both in our schools, homes, and community, who are having to make transitions quickly to accommodate the changes during this unprecedented times with our school district. Thank you for all your help. During this time, we are especially thankful for teachers, bus drivers, staff, custodians, administrators, families, and pray that all will do their best to stay safe and healthy during the holidays. And one of the things is start wearing a mask. God bless.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. If you're watching at home, you can see that magically we can convene a public meeting, actually talk into a mic with a mask on and run everything. So maybe some folks a little south of here might be able to pick up a little bit on that. Any other commissioner comments? Sorry, I couldn't pass the opportunity. Any other questions, comments? I'm sorry, from commissioners.
This is Commissioner Slack. I would like to echo the same thing. I just want our staff to know and the administration to know we are very pleased for the job we're doing, trying to battle everything with the COVID and try to keep a balance between the academic process. So I appreciate the teachers, the staff, and everyone that has worked so tirelessly on trying to keep our kids in school. And unfortunately, even though we can't be there physically, I'm happy that we're going to try to be there safely, virtually, and do our very best this school year to do whatever we can do for our kids. And that same sentiment. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Commissioner Slack. Moving on to the public comment. To minimize the risk of exposure for members of the public sharing the same microphone at the podium and to manage people in the room. Sorry, my glasses fogged up while I was talking. We'll continue to receive public comment through our online portal. The public comment portal was activated on Monday, November 9th, and remained open until 4 p.m. today. We received 3 written comments on top of the 4 that we had on Tuesday's meeting, for a total of 7. Those public comments are posted in board docs in item 3.01 and are available for review by the media and the public. Moving on to the consent agenda. In section 4, are there any questions or requests to remove an item from the consent agenda? Yes?
Yeah, Commissioner O'Connor, thank you. I did have a question. I didn't know if now was the time to question or ask a question, or did you want to get through the adoption process?
You can ask now.
Okay, excellent. Well, I did want to just mainly on the personnel piece. I know there was some dialogue in a previous meeting about resignations and the nature of those, and I think I just wanted to clarify at least my understanding around the quantity of resignations. Just to be clear about that, I think through, or maybe even comparing that to a year ago, just trying to understand the trend. And then secondly, just, in light of all the realities that we're living through, just curious about what vacancies look like as a whole from a staffing or from an educator standpoint, kind of where we are today and what that might have looked like a year or two ago.
Trying to pull up my email from Mindy Schlegel for this month, but essentially we've had 2 months in a row with some of our lowest resignation as it relates to our staffing, and so are doing quite well in terms of being able to maintain staff stability during, a particularly challenging time for the district. We can get the year over year for you. I believe the headline will be, we have less vacancies and higher retention this year compared to last year, but we'll get that exact data for you.
All right, thank you.
I'm happy to chime in if that's helpful.
Oh, hello, Mindy. Please do so.
Yeah, I actually pulled that data earlier today. So it's been a really significant, I'm always hedging my bets, but we've seen a 26% drop in resignations over the past, over the past year, and it's just the trend that's continued over the past 4 years on a steady clip. So we're really happy to see that just in general. As of today, we have 27 certified vacancies. And this time last year on this date, we had over 57. So you can just sort of see the number of spots that are open has reduced significantly. And I would just say personally on the personnel report, I'm sure Superintendent Johnson could do the same. I've never seen a number as low as 4 for certified resignations for a month. So it was, I believe I looked at the same time personnel report last year, it was 4 times that. So all good trends, I think, not for any one reason, but all looking good for students
in IPS.
Great, thank you both.
Any further questions or items to discuss on the consent agenda? Hearing
I
none.
would like to chime in.
Go ahead, Commissioner Slack, I'm sorry.
Slack.
Go ahead, Commissioner Slack.
I would like to know, is the resignations around COVID, or is this the typical resignation that we typically see?
We do survey staff in terms of reasons. It's a voluntary exit survey, so we don't always get the data back. But I would say I would not connect it to COVID. In fact, I might even claim like a reverse trend. So, I'm sure it's probably contributing to sort of a lower turnover, just job instability and instability across our communities, because we've seen it both in classified and certified. But that would sort of be my best guess. But we have not experienced sort of a large exodus in terms of retirements or resignations because of COVID.
Thank you.
Mindy, this is Commissioner Gore. As we are talking about personnel, are we looking at a full ledge of teachers for special ed, or are we going to look at a shortage doing our virtual learning during the time that we'll be out? How does that area look at it for us right now?
So that has followed the same kind of trend. So we've seen far less resignations, and we've been able to fill far more slots this year.
So right now we have enough teachers.
Yeah, we only have 27 vacancies for the whole district as of today.
Okay. Well, I was
which is very,
specifically speaking to special ed.
yeah, I don't know offhand how many of the 27 are special ed. I can find out. But that's just low across the board.
Okay. No, that is a low number, and that's good. Thank you.
Hearing no other questions, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying. That?
Roll call.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Zach's for reminding me we have to do roll call vote because of the electronic participation. So Zach will call the roll call for the vote. Thank
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
you. Yeah. Yes.
The motion carries by a vote of 6-0.
Thank you. Sorry, I was looking forward to since my tenure on this board is turning towards an end, I'll let everybody in the public, the thousands and thousands of people who watch these meetings, know that Zach actually scripts the board meetings, so you'll understand why I was laughing here in a minute. Moving to Section 5, board reports, we have one item for action, which is our 2021 board meeting calendar. At this time, I'd like to correct my statement from Tuesday and say that I deeply care about this agenda item, and I will publicly commit to attending all of the board meetings in 2021, even after my term has expired. That is an untrue statement. On Tuesday, there were several questions regarding potential conflicts and meeting dates. Mr. Wallen has done a little bit of work, so could you give us a little report out on that?
Yeah, so I did scrub the calendar for just potential conflicts with national observances or religious holidays, and I did provide that information to you all via email, and then followed up specifically on the religious holidays that were identified through that review. And they did some outreach with practitioners of both the Muslim and Jewish faith to get some feedback as to whether those conflicts warranted a shift in the meeting. And the feedback I received was that that it would be okay to hold those meetings on those dates. That, again, the Jewish holidays weren't major holidays that would dictate a shift in schedule. And then consulted with our own Ahmed Young with regard to the Muslim conflict, and he had the same feedback for that holiday. So I think what we should do is plan on for any of those conflicts, just embed that into our meeting protocol, so at least we're acknowledging both religious holidays and then any of those other observances that were identified.
Thank you, Mr. Mulholland. Any further questions? Well, let's ask, do I have a motion to approve the 2021 calendar as presented?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussions or questions for Mr. Mulholland on the calendar?
I'll just note for commissioners again that we still have to create the academic calendar, and so once that's done, we'll do another run to ensure we don't have any conflicts with breaks or those kinds of occasions.
Thank you. Mr. Mulholland, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Resounding yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 6-0.
Thank you, Mr. Mulholland, and I'll turn the agenda over to Superintendent Johnson for the superintendent reports.
Great, thank you, President O'Connor. There are 3 superintendent reports for this month. We presented an update on our COVID-19 response on Tuesday evening. I will do a brief summary of those things during superintendent comments, and we'll present the other 2 items this evening. Item 6.01 is our school spotlight on Francis Bellamy. So I'm very excited to welcome Kathy Langdon, who serves as our Director of Early Learning and leads the team at Francis Bellamy School 102, to share more with us about the great things happening at Francis Bellamy and our preschool programming across the district. So, good evening, Kathy. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, and with much respect, Superintendent Johnson, we have the wrong Kathy. Kathy Langton's our PE.
Oh, I sure do.
That's okay.
Kathy Harold,
There are
and
so
I'm
many
looking straight at
Kathys.
you.
Yeah, no problem at all.
I also have my script, and I scripted it wrong.
Okay. Well, good evening. I'm Kathy Harold, the Director of Early Learning for Indianapolis Public Schools, and also the principal at Francis Bellamy School 102. I'm fortunate to have a dual role with IPS in that as Director of Early Learning. I'm able to support and oversee the district preschool program in 31 sites. And additionally, I'm the proud principal of the only IPS preschool center, which is located at Francis Bellamy School 102. The second year of my dual role has provided a unique perspective of our early childhood program. I don't know who, oh, sorry. There we go. I'd like to provide the background of our program at Francis Bellamy, a little bit about our school, about our preschool program and the preschool center, and identify some of the internal and external support systems that are in place. It's my hope that you'll have a better understanding of Francis Bellamy School 102 at the end of this presentation. Francis Bellamy Elementary was built in 1961 and opened as School 102, serving neighborhood children in grades K through 6. The gymnasium was added in 1987. This IPS elementary was named after the author of the Pledge of Allegiance and is located next to the 7-acre Indy Park of the same name. Francis Bellamy School 102 and Bellamy Park share the same address, 9501 East 36th Place. The IPS preschool program has expanded from 11 sites in 2013 to our current 31 sites, including IPS choice programs and innovation schools. But Francis Bellamy Preschool Center in the far east side section of IPS remains our only early childhood center. Our preschool program mission statement aligns with the IPS mission statement. It emphasizes the importance of equity and access, as well as honoring identity and recognizing diversity. As early childhood educators, we are charged with the holistic development of the children we serve. Team Bellamy has 20 members that work with or support our preschool students. Of the 15 full-time members, 5 have been at the center since it opened in 2013. We offer full-day general education preschool and half-day sessions of developmental preschool. Our student population represents the diversity of our East Side neighborhood. In addition to the student demographic information presented, we have 6 different languages represented by our young scholars. Activities and experiences are intentionally designed to address the Indiana Early Learning Foundations. We use the second step curriculum to support social and emotional learning. And our consistent routines and procedures help students internalize school expectations and develop a foundation for future self-reliance. The IPS preschool program is designed to promote readiness for academics with the understanding that readiness is not aligned to academic knowledge. Preschool experiences are closely aligned to the development of social, emotional, physical, and mindfulness that will enable a child to fully engage in learning experiences. Everything we do at our center has rationale and purpose. Whether we are teaching and modeling our core values, kindness, safety, and respect, practicing self-regulation skills, describing how we feel, or hopping on one foot across the gym, it is supporting an area of development. Our youngest IPS scholars participated in varied experiences. Play-based to promote social and emotional development, activities that support discovery and inquiry, as well as lessons that provide academic exposure to develop them intellectually. Every preschooler received an iPad to support full-time remote learning. Their technology skills are kept sharp through the use of the devices during the day. We recognize the need to connect with our families and stay connected through weekly or daily contact. Our teachers, FACE liaison, and social worker consistently reach out through social media, curbside interactions, and electronic messaging. Our team also stays connected through PLCs. This time provides opportunity to share anecdotal notes and look for trends within their room or across the program. Reflective conversations also occur during staff meetings and with individuals around written feedback provided after walkthroughs. Our center has an outdoor learning lab funded by a donation from Kilroy's, and the Community Health Network provides mental and behavioral support for our scholars. Serving as a food distribution site in our community provided additional support. A new partnership came to us via the Indianapolis Public Library just last week. Today and tomorrow, preschool art kits have been or will be delivered at all preschool sites for all 1,005 preschool students. We also rely on Team IPS and partner with all departments that offer support to enhance our work and meet the needs of our scholars. The bulletin board in the entryway at Francis Bellamy announces, "The future of the world is in this school." This statement reflects our commitment to the children and families that we serve. This opportunity to share information about the only IPS preschool center and the only IPS site that sits in this east side section of our district is greatly appreciated. Thank you. Any questions?
Commissioner Arnold?
First of all, thank you. As a former preschool teacher, I love the little people. They are wonderful. I have 2 questions. One, can you talk a little bit about how the COVID pandemic has affected your school attendance, participation?
Our attendance has been pretty constant, and I am impressed at the resilience of our 4-year-olds and keeping a mask on. We have problems with some of our developmental 3-year-olds, but then we have those small shields that have helped immensely.
My second question is, how do children get into the program? Do they apply through Enroll Indy, or what's the process for a parent to get their child in the program? Is it limited to specific children or open to anyone in the district? And how do they get there?
It truly is exactly as you begin to describe through Enroll ND. They go in, they select their preschool site that they would like to attend, and the only ones that are limited are, well, they were capped at it by enrollment, 20 per teacher, and then our choice programs, some are lottery processed.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Collins, did you have a question?
Well, Diane asked several, the ones that I was going to ask, but did you say that there's 20 children per teacher?
Yes, and each teacher has a classroom assistant, so the ratio is 10 to 1.
That's great.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Thank you, Director Harrell. Appreciate the update. And, echo Commissioner Arnold's question about the COVID situation. I'm sure that has been challenging, but again, we thank you very much for what you're doing. And also an additional kudos as a site school leader and a site director for all pre-K. I mean, that's a heavy lift, so thank you again for that. From an enrollment standpoint, I'm just curious, how many students are enrolled at Francis Bellamy?
With both programs, we currently have 48, which is about 65% of our capacity.
Okay. How does that compare? And I know we're going to get probably a little deeper into the enrollment conversation. I see Mr. Harrell shaking his head back there. When you think about the total enrollment of preschool students or pre-K students, developmental pre-K students, what percentage would you say the Francis Bellamy community, of that greater number, like what percentage of that total county? Because you mentioned 31 sites. I'm just curious what since this is, we call it, a preschool learning center, I'm just curious what the percentage is there compared to the total.
Yes, I would like to defer the exact number to Director Harold, but my best estimate is from the conversations that I have with the teams in our other schools is they're all about 65, 75% at capacity, and some of those students are virtual.
Okay. All right.
Yep, we'll let.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do any of our commissioners on the phone have any questions?
Yes, this is Commissioner Slack. I had only one question. I just want to know about how creative have you gotten to be with having to do virtual schooling for the kids? How creative have your curriculum been for your model?
Since we're fortunate to have one-to-one devices, we're amazed at the way our parents have been able to support an hour or an hour and a half of interaction with the classroom teacher. And then they'll maybe log off and come back on for 15 or 20 minutes later in the day. So it really has been the parents doing the heavy lifting at home and supporting, and in some instances, daycares, where they have a number of our students. We combine classrooms in that instance to make it more easily managed at the daycare facility.
Thank you. Thank you for coming too.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins? I have one more question. Thank you. So thinking about the little ones in the developmental pre-K, I'm just curious sort of how, kind of echoing some of Commissioner Slack's question about creativity and, the little itty bitty ones. I noticed some 3-year-olds and probably 4-year-olds, of course, like with technology, and that's tricky. And you mentioned parents are really just, stepping up like parents do. How have you really tried to be creative as you think about the developmental pre-K in this remote setting that we're moving back to? Because we know that our students in the developmental pre-K may need additional supports and those types of things. So just curious how you adapt those supports into the remote setting for the developmental pre-K kiddos.
The developmental team has done a remarkable job working with our special education department, and they truly individualize the support as much as possible, and then provide parents with resources, books, kits, manipulatives, so that if the child is not engaged with technology, the teacher works with the parent to help replicate some experiences that would happen in the classroom.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for this
Thank you for all your
opportunity.
hard work.
Kathy, Harold, thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson.
Excellent. We will move on to item 6.02, which is an update on our school year 2021 enrollment data. And so I'll invite Patrick Harrell, our Director of the Office of Enrollment and Options, to share that presentation with us at this time. A quick little cleanup on the podium and get started.
So I'm going to turn it over to Patrick here, but just have a really quick tee up. So as we brought to you a little over a year ago at this point, just shared that over the course of the last several years, IPS has made several portfolio changes, whether it be changes to grade levels that are housed at specific buildings, program offerings in terms of expanding our choice offerings and our high school reinvention work that we did, moves or building closures, and then also changes to governance models within our buildings as we move some schools to innovation status. Also, just a reminder of the annual cycle in the portfolio context. So we start at the top of the visual here with a really robust needs assessment. One of the primary pieces of data that we analyze in order to assess what potential actions might be needed is our enrollment data, historical trends, demographic trends, and projections. And so Patrick is coming to you this evening with a very robust analysis. It's a 6-year look back, building on the 5-year look back that we saw last year, as well as a particular overlay with potential impacts of our COVID experience this year. He'll go through it both by grade level trends and then also speak some to different things we see showing up in different school types with the demographic overlay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for letting me come back again a year after the last time we did one of these. Like Jamie said, we're going to do a 6-year analysis, but then I'm also going to be sharing data that we were able to pull that's much more specific to a year-over-year comparison, because we do recognize that with COVID this year, there are some changes in the patterns that we saw that are probably significantly attributable to COVID. The only other thing I wanted to mention as we get started is that we do have very data-heavy slides, so much so that if you accidentally call me Weston, I will totally understand. Given that data-heavy
Your numbers
approach-
aren't small enough to call you Weston.
But given how data-heavy these slides are, I'm going to do a couple things. One, I'm going to try to narrate out loud what slide we're on, especially for Commissioners Slack and Gore, who are not here in person with us. The other thing is, as we get through each section, I'm going to pause and allow you to ask any clarifying questions or bring up any comments so that you don't have to take notes and wait until the very end of the presentation. So feel free to chime in as we get to the end of each section. So these are the sections that we're going to go through, and we're going to start with K-12. And this slide is a slide that you've seen quite a few times before. And I wanted to start here because this shows overall enrollment. And you may have been asked the question, is enrollment at IPS up or is it down? And the answer is actually surprisingly nuanced, and so I wanted to give that context. This slide, as you can see, the color indicates the type of school, and at the top of each bar, you'll see an orange section, and that represents state takeover schools. Weston always includes these numbers in his accounting of students because when it comes to a finance perspective, those dollars flow through IPS and then historically went through takeover schools. And so the orange at the top of each one of those columns represented students at takeover schools. From a strict enrollment perspective, we did not count those students, nor did the state count those as IPS students while they were under state takeover operated by multiple different operators. So as you can see, when we get to last year and then into this year, if you include those as Weston does from a finance perspective and where dollars flow, we are down. But from a pure enrollment perspective, since that orange section at the very top is not actually IPS students or weren't last year, technically from last year to this year, we are up. and we are up by about 1%. I want to be clear, though, when we look at what that means and how we contextualize that, there are two main reasons that we are up 1% for our total enrollment. The first is, obviously, those state takeover schools closed, and either we absorbed a percentage of those students or we absorbed the entire school through innovation partnerships. So Manual High School and Emadonin Middle School both became innovation partners of ours. And so those were very large populations of students who last year were not part of IPS's total enrollment and now are part of IPS's total enrollment. The second thing that influences the total enrollment increasing by 1% over last year is that Crystal House Academy, which was a 600+ K-12 existing school, became an Innovation Network school this year. And so that also increased our enrollment. But, and I'll show you this on the next slide, when you look purely at the bottom, so we're on slide 7 now for those following along at home. When you look at the bottom of this table, you'll see two different numbers. On the left, you'll see the total percent change in enrollment from last year to this year, and you'll see it's 101%, meaning that we are up 1% on our total enrollment for the reasons that I just explained. But we also think it's really important to look school by school and ask the question, if we look at school A last year and then that same school this year, is that school up or down? And when we roll that up and look only at schools that existed in IPS last year and then still exist this year, we are down 3%. So that's what you see on the furthest right column at the very bottom where you see 97%. That tells us that when you take out the new schools that were added in, that in some ways kind of artificially made it look like our enrollment overall was increasing, and instead you just look apples to apples, we are 97% to last year. The other thing that I want you to notice in this slide is when we look by grade, you can see that there are very clear trends for where we lost students, and it's primarily at our lowest grades. Commissioner Hawkins, you were asking about the lowest grades, especially pre-K, with Ms. Harold presenting just a minute ago, and that was where we saw our largest decrease from last year to this year. We're at 54%, but in general, grades K through 6 overall saw a decrease in enrollment from last year to this year. This takes that same data where we look at the enrollment from a school last year to this year. It color codes them based on the greener they are, the more their enrollment increased, the redder they are, the more their enrollment decreased. And you can see overall we have a lot of orange and red on this map, showing that most schools tend to be down in their enrollment. We do have some exceptions, as you can see on the map, but generally enrollment is down from last year to this year. So key takeaways from that K-12 enrollment trends, we do see overall our enrollment is up 1%, and that's with the addition of the state takeover schools coming back into our network as well as Crystal House Academy. But when you look school by school, enrollment is down. PK through 6 enrollment in particular was where our enrollment was down the most. And the other thing that you may have noticed in this map is that the schools that were around the periphery of our district tended to be down in their enrollment numbers more than schools closer to the center of the district. We're still trying to figure out exactly what that means because we also know that the surrounding townships did not necessarily report significant increases in their enrollment. So it's not easily explainable by saying a ton of our students left to go to townships, but we do know that we did see that trend around the periphery. So I'm going to pause there and see what clarifying questions or comments commissioners have at this point.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Mr. Harold, thank you for the chapter 1 of the presentation. And I really appreciate the context around the turnaround schools and the figures there. And I like how you sort of deferred to Weston on, Weston's math suggested X, Y, and Z. Just kidding. But what I guess what I am interested in when we think about those turnaround schools, particularly the 1,400 some students, I know that we were, there are all kinds of hurdles and challenges to be even in community and connection with the students at the turnaround schools. Do we know where a predominance of those students are now or what happened?
We do. We know that 70% of the students that could have stayed with IPS in some fashion did stay with IPS. So obviously, any 12th grade student who's graduating, we took them out of the equation. But 70% overall of students at turnaround schools did stay with IPS. On a school-by-school basis, there was a pretty large variance. So at Manual High School, for example, 92% of students stayed at Manual High School for this year. At Emmedon Elementary School and Middle School, 79% of those students who were able to stayed, or who chose to stayed. And then at Howe, it was just 40% of students stayed within the IPS family of schools.
Thank you.
Commissioner Arnold?
As I look at this map and I look at the green, they to me indicate predominantly innovation schools. Is that part of the trend that we're seeing, that the increase we're seeing can potentially be tied to schools becoming innovation schools?
We're gonna, when we get to the slides on K-8, we're gonna go a little bit more into detail. What we see in general is a trend more towards choice schools, whether they are innovation schools or not, tend to have stable or increasing enrollment, whereas conversely, neighborhood schools, whether they are innovation schools or not innovation schools, tend to have decreasing enrollments. That's especially at the K-8 level, that's the trend that we tend to see, and we'll get into more details in a few slides.
Any commissioners on the phone have questions? Hearing none, let's move on. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Slack, go ahead.
Commissioner Slack, I am wondering, you had a decrease in pre-K, or did you say you have an increase in pre-K?
A decrease, a very significant decrease. We're 54%, I think it was, to last year for our pre-K enrollment.
Okay, and with some of these kids, are they going to their neighborhood pre-Ks, or I know we have like 5 of them, right? Or was it 5 or a little bit more than pre-Ks around Indiana? So are they choosing to stay with that school, or are they choosing to go somewhere else? Are we going to get to that? Sorry.
No, it's tough precisely to know where all of the students who would have otherwise enrolled, because for years and years, we have been at capacity for pre-K, and in fact, we've had waiting lists in the past. So this is the first year we've been under-enrolled. Anecdotally, what I know is that for a lot of families, pre-K is great that it has an educational component, but it is also, for all intents and purposes, daycare for families who have working jobs and lives. And so when that was not an option, especially at the beginning of the year, we know anecdotally a lot of families just needed a place for their students to be, especially in the pre-K grades, and so found other daycare alternatives.
The other thing I'll add, Commissioner Slack, there is the pre-K kinder trend of being down is pretty common nationwide, that many districts have seen families just choosing to keep their child at home, or to Patrick's point, in a sort of early learning facility versus starting in the more formal K-12 system, given COVID-19. So that trend has played out across the country with pre-K and kindergarten.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
And I do know.
Commissioner Gore.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Gore.
Okay. Thank you for explaining the portion that you have. However, why are we being reported as our enrollment being down? Is that just because of COVID? From what you're showing us, our enrollment is kind of flat. It's not, well, it is going up because we just took on some other schools. So will you get to that later, or what am I looking at?
No, I think the reality is that the question of what is our enrollment doing is nuanced, because like I said, we added schools, and so in total our enrollment is up compared to last year. But if you look school by school, I think that's a really important trend, because that has very significant financial implications and staffing implications and planning implications. And when you look school by school, our enrollment is down school by school compared to last year. And that is one of the reasons why we're seeing some of these financial challenges that we know we're going to face, and others.
Okay.
And
Okay, yeah, basically. Because I kept wondering what were we looking at, and was it just due to COVID at this point? that we don't know where those students are. But you're saying that we can't even account for them going over to the other districts or townships at this point. Am I correct?
True. We also know that the state of Indiana has a law that does not require compulsory attendance in education until a student turns 7. So it's not terribly surprising, for me at least, to see that pre-K, K, and even first grade is down generally, because that's not a compulsory grade. And if a family has another alternative or just wants to take care of their child at home, they don't even have to explore an option in another township or a charter. They can just make that choice. And so I think that is probably one of the big implications of what we're seeing.
And I would only add, my understanding of the state's On My Way pre-K program is they've seen something just a little north of a 60% drop in participation statewide in On My Way pre-K, which again is a lot of families are choosing to keep their kids at home. Commissioner Hawkins?
I think one more just observation. I'm looking at slide 8, the map, and if you sort of looking at looking at the green to dark green, if you sort of strip out the schools that we know that are scaling up still grade by grade, there are a few schools that just, in Lasse, at Kipp Elementary, George Washington Carver, there are schools that are continuing to increase enrollment, and their buildings aren't getting bigger for sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to flag that as something that's somewhat buried in the scale up of many of our programs, but building capacity becomes is clearly evident in this map here, which is a challenge, but also means demand is up, which is good as well.
Definitely, and I think you're right that there are schools on this list that would have been in the green had they had the physical space to do so, because the schools certainly have the demand to grow, but because of their physical capacity, they're not able to. I agree. All right, let's press ahead.
Sorry, Commissioner Slack.
Please go ahead.
I'm sorry if I cut somebody off. It has a 5-second, thing, so I couldn't know. I wanted to know, on the map, it looks like on here that on the east side, is it significant to say that on the east side we're seeing a trend where, I see Arlington on the slide 8 that is in green, and then I see Fallon 93 that's in green, but on the east side you see yellow and you see orange and you see red. So we have a significant decrease in schools, but yet we know that the need is there. So what would that map be telling us there?
Yeah, I think that's a really important trend to pick up on. And if actually you wouldn't mind, I want to show you a couple other slides that reinforce what you just noticed, Commissioner Slack, because it is certainly true that in this 1 to 2 year trend that we're looking at right now and a 6-year trend, we see the same sorts of things that you're picking up on the east side of town. So I actually want to move us ahead to slide number 11, and then we'll get to some maps that demonstrate the point that you're bringing up, Commissioner Slack. So on slide 11, this shows our enrollment specifically at the K-8 level. And you'll see some continuing trends that we do see enrollment at our neighborhood schools continuing to decrease. Obviously, there's a big change this year from schools that formerly were IPS direct managed neighborhood schools in the lighter blue at the bottom and are now in the dark blue at the top. So Phelan Leadership Academy is now operating Lewis B. Russell School 49, so that represented a switch. The Path School that used to be Stephen Foster School 67 represented a switch. And so there are certainly some trends that we see for shifting of types of schools. But then generally we also see a general growing of enrollment for our choice schools, a general growing of enrollment for our innovation schools, and a decreasing enrollment at our neighborhood schools. If you look, this is the same map, but instead it's 6-year trends. So if you take a 6-year average of growth rate or decrease rate, and you plot that based on the same color scheme, you'll see the same sorts of patterns. And this is really where you start to see the pattern that Commissioner Slack was picking up on, where we see on the east side of town a whole lot of red and orange. And so there are certainly a lot of factors playing into that. We know that there is competition with charter schools that are not connected with IPS. We know that kind of as you get further to the east, there is competition with surrounding townships, private schools, and the voucher system that serves students. We also know that there may be impacts of demographic trends across the city for where families are settling generally, because conversely, as you look to the north and west sides of the city, we've seen in the 5-year trend last year and this year increasing enrollment generally. The other thing that we see in this map, and it's not as clear in this one, and so I'm going to parse it out. The next map shows K-8 enrollment at neighborhood schools, the 6-year enrollment trend. And what you see generally is what I mentioned earlier. Our neighborhood schools tend to be decreasing in enrollment. And so you see a lot of oranges and reds and yellows on this map with a couple exceptions. And then conversely, the next map shows us the same K through 8 enrollment trends, 6-year enrollment trends, but instead at choice programs. And these tend to be yellow and green. And so we are seeing generally that our choice programs are staying stable or increasing their enrollment. And so I think it's worthwhile to dig a layer deeper into why that is and what might be behind that. And so I wanted to bring forward 2 data points. Essentially, when you think about enrollment in a school, there are 3 factors. It's getting kids in the door, it's keeping kids in that door through the course of the year, and then getting kids back the next year. And so on the left, you'll see the third piece of that, getting kids back the next year. You'll see that our choice schools, they had an overall increase from last year to this year of 1%. So they were able to keep a very large number of their students, and when they needed to, they were able to recruit more students. Conversely, our neighborhood schools saw a 7% decrease in last year's enrollment compared to this year's enrollment. So we see a pretty enormous difference there. On the right side of your screen, you see the second piece of keeping kids in the door once they are there. This shows 3-year stability trends at schools. Essentially, the way we calculate this is we look at any given school and we say, how many students did you serve throughout the entire year? A total number, whether that student was there one day or the entire year, you count that student and you look at all of the students that they served. And then you compare that total of students served to the number of students who were enrolled at that school on the September ADM count date. What we see when we do that is at our choice schools, 95% of students are there by ADM count date. So basically, they hang on to those students really effectively throughout the year, and they have very few additional students, either because they don't have room or because they just lose so few students. Conversely, at our neighborhood schools, only 73% of their students are there by that September count date, and they either lose students through mobility or family choices, and they gather more students throughout the school year. And so this tells us, I think, 2 sides of that enrollment story, which is that at choice schools, there is a very positive impact that we see of families getting to choose a school, and that helps retain students throughout the year and from one year to the next. But there are some very real consequences that are associated with being a neighborhood school. Namely, you have a very small transportation boundary. And so if a family has disruption during the school year and needs transportation, they often have to move to a different school. One of the reasons why we see that higher mobility rate. And so things like mobility play out very significantly in enrollment from one year to the next, and they are very rooted in the conditions that we set up at choice schools versus at neighborhood schools. And they're playing out very clearly in the data. So again, for this K-8 trend, a couple things that we're seeing generally. We're seeing choice school enrollment up, neighborhood school enrollment down. We're seeing mobility play a very significant factor in that. And the higher the mobility is, the more we end up seeing enrollment decrease. And then as Commissioner Slack previewed, we're seeing generally northwest side of town enrollment up and south and east side of town enrollment decreasing. So I'll pause there for questions.
Commissioner Collins.
Just anecdotally, I have spoken to a number of parents, and since I live on the east side, then and grew up on the south side, then I have some connections on both sides of that town. So the attraction of choice programs is one of the motivating factors for, of course, enrolling in those. and the resentment against having a lack of choice programs, although it doesn't explain super school, but in the neighborhood schools, then people ask for choice programs. And I know people in the neighborhood schools who have transferred their kids as soon as they could to a choice program in order to take advantage of what they see as a more enriched learning experience for their children.
Yeah, I think you're right to think about where we have historically placed our choice programs and what, as we're thinking about our portfolio approach, what we might do about a portfolio of programs in the future.
Commissioner Hawkins.
I have a question just maybe about consistent definitions and language throughout the presentations into the next chapters that you're going to go into. When we look at, or when we looking at slide 15, to be clear, when we differentiate through the presentation between choice and neighborhood, innovation neighborhood is part of the neighborhood total figure throughout? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
There, you will see one slide where there is an innovation, a choice, and a neighborhood, and there, of course, it is parsed out separately.
Yeah.
But if you just see choice and neighborhood, innovation will be in both of those categories,
Okay.
whether it's an innovation neighborhood or an innovation choice.
Thank you for that clarification.
Commissioner Slack, thank you, Vice President Hawkins, for saying that and clarifying that. I was thinking the exact same thing. I did have a question. So when we do use that definition of choice, we know that we have a high number of enrollment for our choice programs when it comes to CFIs and Montessori programs. So I'm not too concerned when I see this map that shows that they really didn't have significant change, minimum change, when we look at the slide 14, I believe it is. But I guess I want to say the echo of the same thing that Commissioner Collins says. When we do place certain schools, like innovation schools, with our neighborhood schools, we are sending the message that, like, some of these schools are now, the kids are leaving the neighborhood schools and going to these choice programs. So it will be very interesting to see our conversation around our portfolio model on this.
Commissioner Collins, you had a question.
And I just want to know, it's not a question, it's just a comment that knowing about the charter presence on the east side and the southeast side, and perhaps even towards the north, closer to Warren Township, Lawrence, there's the competition there between going to either an IPS school or a charter that may have a program that is advertised as being more attractive. I think that's something that it puts the stress on our schools in this neighborhood, in the east side and the south.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll keep pressing forward unless there are any other questions, because I know I've got a lot of data to present to you. I want to talk about retention of students at critical grade points. We see that we lose as a district the largest percent of students at the 6th to 7th grade transition and at the 8th to 9th grade transition. And so we're going to look at each one of those, starting with the 6th to 7th grade transition. You'll see we're on slide 18, two different graphs. And so on the left side, you'll see K through 6 schools and their retention rates. On the far left, you'll see last year's retention rate. And then the second to the left, you'll see this year's. And you'll see that our retention rate decreased by 2 points at our K6 schools. And then on the right side, you'll see that same information with the K8 retention from 6th to 7th grade last year and this year. And so two things that we see that we decreased our ability to retain students from 6th grade to 7th grade, likely very largely due to COVID. And second, and a continuing trend, our ability to retain students at K8 buildings from 6th grade to 7th grade is significantly higher than our ability to retain students within the IPS family from 6th grade to 7th grade when they have to transition to a new school. And so those are the big takeaways from this slide. The other way that I wanted to parse it was to, instead of looking at K-6 and K-8 buildings and their retention rates, I also wanted to look at choice and neighborhood schools. And we see the same trends that I referenced earlier in terms of ability to keep and retain students. We see that our choice schools have a significantly higher retention rate from 6th to 7th grade than our neighborhood schools do from 6th to 7th grade. And so two trends that we're seeing in terms of keeping our students and keeping our enrollment up. We did see a pretty significant.
Can I ask one question? Sorry for, and I'm re-asking the same question that I believe Commissioner Hawkins asked, but in that slide, we have innovation network schools in both.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry for interrupting.
You're fine. We did see, like I mentioned, a significant decrease in our retention from last year to this year, and that's represented on the left was last year's retention, and on the right was this year's retention. Interestingly, fewer students as a total quantity left to go to charter schools, but significantly more left to go to township schools. And certainly I suspect that COVID and different districts' decisions about how to start the school year played a factor in that decision and that change from last year to this year. So again, the key takeaways, we're seeing retention from 6th to 7th grade decrease as compared to last year. Our K-8 schools have higher retention than our K-6 schools. Our choice schools have higher retentions than our neighborhood schools. And we saw an increase in students leaving for private and township alternatives. I'll pause there for questions.
Commissioner Arnold.
All of the surrounding districts take IPS students. I know in the past it was you couldn't pick and choose who. If you said you were going to, you had to take everybody that applied. What's the current?
The current policy is you have to set a date by which you will accept students, and then after that date, you can say you will no longer accept out-of-district students. And so different districts select different dates. Some select pretty early in the summer, some select basically all the way up until ADM count date, and then they still have the ability to accept based on whether or not they have available seats. So you could go to another district and say, I want to be at X school, and they could say, actually, X school is full. So that's the current state of affairs.
But it would be to their advantage to accept the students before the ADM count.
Certainly.
So they get the funds for that student.
Yes.
I also just want to highlight, this is just 6th to 7th. So when you think about, and I don't know, Patrick, if you have the total number, but again, the magnitude of loss to our surrounding townships, it's very easy to concentrate on just charters in Center Township, but it's quite significantly greater when the number of students leaving IPS to go to surrounding townships. So I do want to make that clear around who we're losing to.
And you think that's because of they had a different format to start school?
So I think this year, certainly COVID played a part in that, but that has been the trend. That's not new just for this year.
Yeah, so to put some numbers behind that, last year we lost 229 6th grade students to 7th grade to townships and privates, and that was 2/3 of all of the students that we lost. This year it was up to 359, again, over 3/4 of all of the students we lost. So our real competition, like Superintendent Johnson is mentioning, in terms of where students are leaving, is for townships and privates, not necessarily charters as a percentage.
Commissioner Hawkins, you had a question?
Yeah, wanted to clarify the private and township. I mean, that's a pretty big bump. We've talked about potential reasons why. How do you think that really cuts between township and private? Do you think it's evenly distributed, or, so that's one question. The second one is there a particular township or townships that we have seen an increased movement? Because I know when we go to the next slides and kind of get into the 8 to 9 transition, the moving out of IPS number increased. And so I'm curious if there's some parallels there with particular border townships or border private schools.
It's a great question. Unfortunately, we don't have great visibility into once a student leaves the Enroll Indy network of schools, we don't have much visibility into what specific school they went to. The state, in their new system that they are rolling out in probably 2 years, is promising that we'll have a lot more visibility so that we could answer that question. Honestly, because of Enroll Indy, we have a lot of detail on which charter schools our students are choosing, which is great, but since they don't track the privates and the townships, we don't have great specific data.
Thank you.
Commissioner Slack, again.
Go ahead,
I have a
Commissioner Slack.
question.
I'm trying to play that 5-second delay game, so I never know when it's clear to go, but please go ahead with your question.
No problem, thank you. When I'm looking at the slide 18, I do see that we're getting heavy retention in K-8, and that's unmistakable. Like, we are holding our kids there. So do we know exactly what schools are doing better at the retention at the K-8 rate versus the K-6? Because I'm glad that we're keeping a lot of kids, at K-8 because we're keeping them longer when they're in K-8. But do we know why that is? Is it mobility factor, or why is that?
We do have a breakdown of each school and what their retention percentage is. And I didn't include that in this because I know I'm already throwing a lot of numbers at you, but I can certainly follow up with that. I think the most likely explanation for why we retain so many students at our K-8s is that it just doesn't present a natural decision point for them. If you're a 6th grader and your school has a 7th grade, it's pretty easy to just stay in continue on to 7th grade. Whereas if you're at a 6th grader at a K-6 school, you really do have to make a choice, and then you start to evaluate all of the options that you have. And so I think that's probably one of the easiest explanations for why we see a lot of loss at our K-6 schools.
Okay. Now, and when our parents do leave, I asked this last time, I think, Patrick, are we giving them a survey, like, why are you leaving our school, or why are you deciding to enroll somewhere else? Are we trying to get that information will kind of help us lead the decision of what's going on with our kids and where they're going? Are we giving that exit, like saying, like, when I leave school and college, I get an exit exam? Are we getting that to our parents?
Not at a very consistent, systematic level. I think what a lot of schools do is at the end of the year, they ask, are you planning to come back? And then they do get information on, for the families that aren't planning to come back, why that is. But what happens much, much more often is the family does not tell us that they're not planning to return. And once the school year starts, we then find out that another township or another charter has claimed the student, and we release the records to that school, and we have kind of missed our opportunity for that exit interview. I think there are opportunities for us to create more of a culture of selection on the front end, but I think at this point, families don't always, or very frequently even, actively tell us that they're leaving to create that opportunity for an exit interview.
Thank you, Patrick.
Commissioner Gore.
Go ahead.
Okay. I know that the retention, we're looking here K through 8, is high, 97%, and then 2021 it was 89. Are we able to follow our students to high schools? Are we keeping them after the 8th grade even? Are we having a high retention within our high schools in the district? Are they leaving in the 8th grade and going somewhere so that they can position for high schools in other townships or districts?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, Commissioner Gore. And if the rest of the commissioners are comfortable, I can move on to the next part of the presentation that gets exactly at Commissioner Gore's question. So the next section talks about 9 through 12 enrollment, and Commissioner Gore, you'll have to give me just a minute because I'm going to talk about general enrollment trends, and then we'll get to your specific question about retention from 8th to 9th grade and where we see differences across different schools. So starting with overall enrollment, a couple things that I want to point out. Obviously, we have a lot of light blue schools, schools like Broad Ripple that no longer operate, and so those schools, those students tended to shift to other IPS schools. But you'll see the yellow, those are the traditionally managed IPS schools. In general, we are seeing enrollment stay relatively steady. I do want to flag that I don't want to call it a trend yet, but this year's enrollment at our traditionally managed high schools is a little bit down from where we were last year, and we'll want to be very careful about that and make sure that we are pushing to recruit to our traditionally managed schools. We do see continuing increases of enrollment at our innovation choice schools. Obviously, that is driven by both recruitment factors, but I should also mention schools like Crystal House South that had an existing high school dramatically increased that number. Purdue Polytech and Riverside added a 12th grade. KIPP added a 10th grade. Thrival was, for the first time, now has a 9th grade. And so there are some kind of structural increases that are driving those up, and to some degree will continue, but I wanted to point that out. So our general takeaways there are that we see relatively steady enrollment at our district managed schools, and our innovation schools are increasing their enrollment. I'll go ahead and continue to the next section because this was specifically what Commissioner Gore was asking about. When we look, and now we're at slide 26, when we look at retention from 8th grade to 9th grade, we see generally the same trend that we saw last year, though we did see a slight decrease in our retention percentage from 8th grade to 9th grade. Interestingly, we saw a decrease both in retention to IPS direct managed schools. We also saw a decrease in retention to IPS innovation schools, and that was almost entirely taken up by loss to townships and privates, similar to what we see as the largest share of our loss at the 6th to 7th grade level. And so this is the one slide, Commissioner Hawkins, that I mentioned where you'll see choice, innovation, and neighborhood separately broken out. The way to read this slide, and I'll show you this on the IPS choice. So if you look at the column that says IPS choice and it has the green highlights, the way you read this is of all students who go to an IPS 8th grade choice school, 19% of them went to Arsenal Tech, 20% of them went to Crispus Attucks, 3% went to GW, 10% went to Heron, on down the line. And then at the bottom, you'll see that 22% of them went to a non-IPS school. And you can see those trends across the board. A couple interesting things that I want to point out. First, and I think most interestingly, we do not see clear and disproportionate trends of what type of school students are coming from that gets them to leave the district. So for example, I think a lot of people assume that our choice students may be more likely to leave the district for high school than our neighborhood students. And we just last year and this year have not seen that play out in the data. No matter what type of school, IPS choice, innovation, or neighborhood, we see the same general percent of students leaving the district. We also see a lot of our students choosing Arsenal Tech and Attucks, as well as Shortridge. You'll also notice that KIPP Indy is on here, but that's not terribly surprising because KIPP Indy has a K through 8 feeder, and a very large percentage of their students go on to their high school. And so that's why they ring high on the list. This is the crazy slide that I showed you last year as well, and so I'm going to walk you through how to read this. This essentially is your way of knowing, and I forget which commissioner asked this specific question, what 8th grade school tends to send students to what high schools. So if you look, for example, at the Arsenal Tech column that has the red, what you'll see is that Daniel Webster, 42% of 8th graders at Daniel Webster choose Arsenal Tech. And if you're reading to the right, then you'll see that 13% of Daniel Webster students choose Crispus Attucks, 11% choose George Washington, and on down the line. And the color coding is essentially showing, it is highlighting what high school receives the largest plurality of students from that particular 8th grade building. So you can see that Daniel Webster, the plurality of students go to Arsenal Tech. Whereas if you go down to the orange section, IPS Butler Lab School 60 sends the plurality of their students to Crispus Attucks. And so this is how you can see which schools, which 8th grade buildings are sending students to what high schools. A couple trends to notice. On the far right, you'll see non-IPS schools. We have a couple schools that are sending a very high percentage of students outside of the district for 9th grade, and we certainly should look into that. We also see that there are a couple high schools that don't have a huge number of obvious feeders. And so we probably need to do some more recruitment and support to make sure that those schools have a natural and strong recruitment feeder pattern. But very data-heavy slide that I find fascinating that we could probably spend hours on, but I know we don't have that time tonight. So key takeaways here, overall, our retention from 8th to 9th grade is down, and we do see a wide variation by grade for where 8th grade buildings send their high schools, students for high school. I'll pause there for questions.
Commissioner Arnold?
So, does this graph say that 88% of the children that attend Center for Inquiry at 84 did not stay in the district?
You are reading that correct, yes.
88% of the 8th graders,
That's right.
yes.
Of the 8th graders
Yes.
did not matriculate to any of our high schools.
That's correct.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins?
And
Commissioner Slack, I'll come right for you. Commissioner Hawkins, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to sort of piggyback on that, so I was looking at I love this graph. Like, don't ever stop presenting this graph. It is
You
awesome.
might want to enlarge the letters for me.
Yeah, it is. I love it. I looked at last year, and the bottom right corner number at 23% last year said 14%. So that's a leap, a heck of a leap there. And I guess you're closer to this than anyone. What would you attribute to that significant spike?
I have some very early hypotheses. Obviously, the easiest one is COVID and the fact that different districts made different decisions about how they were going to start the school year, and that certainly drove student actions and family choices. I think what is really interesting, though, is on this previous slide where we see that it was not just IPS direct managed schools that decreased their retention of IPS students, but it was also IPS innovation partner schools that decreased their percentage. That makes me wonder, I guess I don't fully understand what is behind that, because it is not as simple as families didn't choose IPS direct managed schools. They also were choosing a school like Heron or Riverside or Purdue or KIPP generally less than they did last year. And I have some COVID-related hypotheses connected to that, but I don't have really good data-informed explanations for why we saw that dramatic change.
Okay, well, I do think we need to stay as close as possible to that, because I think to cut deeper, certainly there's some programmatic trend. Certainly, I mean, I look at IB schools, I'm IB parent. I know that I'd be curious if there's a programmatic pull there for whether it's a private, I'm not sure what, there are private high schools that offer IB, and there are township high schools that offer IB components. I'm just curious, as we continue to dig into this programmatically, where those differentiators are. Would also love to understand a little bit more about sort of the socioeconomic, I'm sure that, which is a whole nother presentation, but just sort of the socioeconomic slice and dice of this data. We look at who's moving, who isn't, and moving particularly to townships or to private schools as well. I think it's just really important as we think about, as we talk about the portfolio planning approach as well. Programmatically, what are families asking for? What are families desiring? And how do we, up the ante perhaps to compete in certain areas or certain ways for all kids? So thank you.
Commissioner Slack?
Thank you. I would piggyback off of Vice President Hawkins when I say that as a parent, I'm a little bit wary, but it's not surprising when I look at this graph to see some of the programs that we have in other townships that are similar, especially when we look at that Center for Inquiry 84. Even when I look at my children's school, 87, 85% of them are going to Shortridge. So I would like to know, when I look down the graph and I see all that red, and they're going to Arsenal Tech, is this a demographic thing? Are some of these schools sending these kids to this school because of demographics? Is there any reason particularly they're going to that school for Arsenal Tech, that entire red line?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is probably a lot more complicated than I have the ability to fully wrap my mind around. I certainly know that there are some schools simply based on proximity. So Harshman, for example, given where it's physically located, it is not at all surprising that they send a very high percentage of their students basically in the backyard to Arsenal Tech. But then other schools like Northwest, I find a little bit more curious because of the physical non-proximity. I think Commissioner Hawkins's question was an interesting one, trying to go a layer deeper around demographics, whether that's race or income and what trends we see for where we're sending students overall. But yeah, I think this slide is really interesting because I'm sure there are just a dozen layers of historical factors and family-based influences and geography and race and income and a whole bunch of other things that all contribute to why certain schools tend to end up as feeders to certain high schools.
Well, I would like to say this map is excellent right here, this slide 28. Do not leave this map. This map is excellent.
Yes,
It has
ma'am.
so many nuggets in it, and I think a big, huge part of it is we need to interact with our parents and figure out what's going on, so then we can dig a little deeper. Because even thinking about the alumni, with my husband coming from Arsenal Tech, you know, you may say you want to take your kids to go to Arsenal Tech because you're alumni of that school. So those kind of things we won't know unless we go deeper with the parents and engaging them and figuring out what's going on with that. But I appreciate this factor of the presentation.
Thank you. I do too. This is Commissioner Gore. I think it really shows kind of what we're doing and what the end results will be. I'm just wondering if some of these non-public schools come and try to take our students from some of our portfolio schools early, knowing that they are, you know, that we have very good schools. We might need to look into that trend as well.
Sure, how we can defend against poaching, absolutely.
Commissioner Collins, I'm sorry.
And this is not necessarily a question, it's just a comment, and that I'm looking at School 57, George Julian 57, and I kind of live over there, and Irvington's a very walkable community. One of the things that School 57 is next to is the Irvington Community Schools, which has a high school. So kids can still go to School 57 and walk to a high school. I think if parents have deep roots in a neighborhood, and I'm thinking about Christian Park School 82, and its enrollment is so far down, but that particular community was a strong Howe alumni community. And so the only high school next would be the Victory Charter School down on the southeast side, or to Irvington.
Sure.
So I would think that, you know, there's a certain proximity interest going on in some of these too.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, our last section is perhaps even data heavier, so I apologize. We just keep on going. So I wanted to start with enrollment by race over time. I have this slide last year. Basically, we don't see much of a significant enrollment by race trend other than an increase in our Hispanic and Latinx families over time. But beyond that, we don't see many other general demographic race-based trends in our enrollment data. But we do continue to see, and this is the slide that I've shown different iterations of it over the years, but on the left side of your screen on slide 34, we see enrollment at our choice schools by race, and on the right side, we see enrollment at our neighborhood schools by race, and we see a pretty big difference. And I think that's one thing that we need to pay a lot of attention to, because in an ideal system where choice is equally available to all families, we would want to see a situation where our neighborhood school enrollment by race pretty completely paralleled our choice school enrollment by race. But what we continue to see is we enroll a lot fewer students of color at our choice schools than we do at our neighborhood schools. And going a level deeper, last year I showed you a similar version of this slide where on the left side of the screen, the two bars show 5 years ago and today's enrollment by race at our choice schools. And then on the right side of your screen, the two bars show 5 years ago and today's enrollment by race at our neighborhood schools. And last year I had some positive news for you, and that was that our choice enrollment by race was increasing in terms of students of color and their access to our choice programs, and it was getting us closer to parity with our neighborhood enrollment by race. Unfortunately, I can't give you that same positive news this year. In fact, we went in the opposite direction. And so we thought it was really important to go a layer deeper to try to understand what is driving that. Why are we not going in the direction that the board has said is a goal of ours, or of yours rather, I should say. And the biggest driver of that are a collection of our highest demand choice schools. Now, a couple things. When I say high demand choice schools, what that means is any school where they get 2.5 times the number of applications than they have seats available. That's how we define high demand choice schools. We intentionally didn't list the high demand choice schools here because the point of this slide is not to call out any school for bad behavior, because it's not something that the school is doing. What you'll see in a minute is instead it is a function of the lottery system that we have set up that is driving this. But if you look at our highest demand choice schools, you will see over the last 5 years, their enrollment by race has enrolled a very, very small percent of students of color. And then if you compare that to the furthest right bar, you'll see that that is district kindergarten for the entire district, where as a district, 79% of our incoming kindergartners identify as students of color, whereas at our highest demand choice schools, that percentage is below 30% very consistently. And so one of the other things that I want to point out is from 2017 to 2018, you see a pretty big spike in the number of students of color accessing our highest demand choice schools. That was when we reduced the mile-and-a-half radius to a half mile, and we also made multiple lottery deadlines. That clearly had a very positive and intended impact, but we have also plateaued. And the reason, if we go another layer deeper for that plateau, is that when we look at these highest demand choice schools, the two highest priorities for how you get a seat are, number one, if you have a sibling there. And so if we are giving that priority to schools that are already disproportionately serving a small percentage of families of color, that means that those siblings are less likely to be families of color. And then proximity, that half-mile radius. And we also know that our highest demand choice schools tend to be located in neighborhoods that have very high percentage of white families. Those two things combined means that 86% of all kindergartners had either a sibling, proximity priority, or both. And that's why we're seeing this leveling off at our highest demand choice schools that will be in conflict with the equity goals that the district has more broadly. So this is not very good news at all, but it's important that you all know that these are the results that we are seeing. On the high school side, when it comes to demographics, this slide shows by race what populations of students our different high schools serve, and you can see that it varies pretty widely from one school to the next. Again, we're on slide 36. But happily, I do have some good news on the high school front. When we look 5 years ago, or actually, I'm sorry, it's 4 years ago, when we did the high school reinvention to now, what we see in every single school is that schools became more diverse and more representative of the overall IPS student population by race as a result of, or very connected with, the reinvention that we saw. So if you look at the IPS direct managed schools, all of them became more diverse by race than they were beforehand. And also, if you look at the IPS Innovation Partner Schools, similarly, they became more representative of the overall student population. And so I think it's exciting that at the high school level, the policies that this board is putting in place are very much in line with the equity goals that you all have put forward. But we do have some challenges at our elementary level, as I pointed out earlier. So key trends, variation by ethnicity at our neighborhood schools, and we're seeing some concerning trends. Schools overall are diversifying over time, especially at the high school level, but our high demand choice schools are struggling to diversify. So key takeaways that I have as I was digging into this data with a lot of other people, one, obviously huge implications of coronavirus and implications on our enrollment. School to school, we saw decreasing enrollment, which is putting lots of pressures on the district writ large. Number two, retention challenges and real opportunities to improve that at the 6th to 7th grade level and the 8th to 9th grade level. And then number three, we see very clear outcomes connected to whether a school is a neighborhood school or a choice school, both in terms of a school's ability to retain students, but also in terms of who gets access to schools by race and ethnicity that we need to grapple with. So I will stop there. I apologize for taking so much of your time. If you have any other questions, please let me know, but I appreciate it.
I have a broader question, and I'm not sure if it's for you or for Superintendent Johnson, but as we think about both the immediate impact of the pandemic on the student population, we know, right? I think I've had this individual conversation with almost every board member that there are going to be long-term impacts, not just with student retention, not just that we saw pre-K cratering across the state, and what does that mean for where families are starting, when their families are starting kids in school, and where they're starting them in school. But are there organizations sort of preparing for and I say this nationally, are there organizations preparing for the challenges that all school systems are going to face? Sort of getting people prepped, knowing, as government budgets are going to shrink, demands on organizations like ours are going to increase.
Yeah, there are a number of education, be it consulting firms or other organizations who are starting to grapple with this. I was on our Council of Great City Schools call today with other superintendents, and that was the question is there is another side to this. We will get on the other side of that, and once we do, there's a lot of work to be done. This is not a one and done recovery sort of process. This is going to take several years. The impact has been tremendous. And so I think, it's hard to live in both of these worlds at the same time, particularly for districts, but there are those who support school districts and schools who are thinking about what the other side of this should look like, who I believe will have access to help us do thought partnership as well.
Any other questions for commissioners? I would say, first of all, I'm a little bit of a data geek. Commissioner Hawkins, I saw you, so but I think that while we see challenges, that's what the purpose of this data is to sort of help direct us in addressing those challenges. And I would say, and Commissioner Collins, I heard your comment with regards to choice programs and opportunities on the east side. That's been a challenge for the almost 6 years I've been on this board, that clearly what we hear families telling us is we need a broader geographic footprint for our choice programs.
Definitely.
I hope that's one of the directions we take coming out of this. Commissioner Hawkins, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut your question.
No, you're fine. Thank you. No, I just think I'm just sitting here staring at 34, right? Slide 34, which is sit in that, and I would encourage our community to sit in that because you think about the representation in our school system as a whole, who we serve demographically. That's not it, and so. I know I need to sit in that a little bit more because I know that particularly with the racial equity work that we are moving in from commitment into action, this is certainly a topic that we need to drill down into. And I also agree that, these are high demand schools, 2.5x of enrollment, or at least open seats, maybe is a better way to put it. Definitely need to look at that also. I think we also have to balance that with what communities also desire. Because I want to be careful, just speaking for myself here, but I want to be careful that we don't just assume that communities want a particular model. I think that needs to be definitely part of the robust planning process as we think about what communities really desire. As a parent, I'm fortunate and privileged enough that I enroll my child in an IB school, but I can't project that on a child in another part of this community that IB works or is the best solution for them or their family. And so I think we have a lot of work to do on this, and so I really appreciate you reflecting this in the previous slides, because to your point earlier, we've started to, some of the modifications that we've made in the admissions process have stalled a little bit, and there are some other inputs and factors. COVID certainly plays into that, but I think these are topics that our community have to be out front and center and talking about, because I would imagine that there are many in our community who benefit from the high demand choice schools that would be blown away and frankly offended, at this reality that we're all living in that has been constructed this way, right? And so maybe some won't, but I do believe that there are some folks that would have some concern about this, but I think we just need to keep pushing and pushing on this issue. So I'm glad you brought this, and again, this slide we got to keep adding to every year. We got to keep bringing this back, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Slack.
Go ahead, Commissioner Slack. Don't go too far.
I would like to ask a question about, first of all, I do echo the same thing that Commissioner Hawkins has said. We need to get out there. I would like to be a part of this process, especially as a parent, to figure out what our parents want, what they desire, and make sure that's relevant for them in this data. But I also like to say, I want to know, I know a couple slides on up, farther on up in the presentation, I did see that Sidner was in the yellow and orange, and I think that was decreasing enrollment. And if you can explain that for me later on, that'd be great. But I also want to give out some kudos when I see slide 37 and 38. Even though we do see demographic changes that are not as high as we expect them to be, we do make some movements when it comes to Shortridge. And I know that comes through the contribution of school closing and then gaining some students. But the numbers are higher, and I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see more African-American students in that school. I also like to say, Heron, I get on them a lot about racial equity, and I do see their numbers going up a little bit, and that's good. I want to see those numbers trending in the right direction, not only for our black students, but also for our brown students. Because if they're wanting to go to that program, I'd like to see them going to those programs. So, again, we have a lot of work to do, but a lot of work is getting out to the community and talking to our parents, because those are our biggest assets and are going to tell us what they really desire for their children. My kids go to Montessori, but that may not be for everyone. But I would like to hear what the communities want when it comes to their kids, when it comes to high school and middle school. So, thank you, Patrick, for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, commissioners, for digging in. I think it is, to everyone's point, really important data that we talk about it, we get into it, we put it out front, because we know there's work to do to address some of those trends that we see, and to help grow the places where we're strong, but address the places where we know we have some clear disparities to address. So thank you for that conversation, and thank you, Patrick, for doing such an excellent job on the data. Item 6.03 was an update on our response to COVID-19, and as I said, I'll provide just a summary of some of those updates in my superintendent comments. And so we have no items in unfinished business, therefore we'll move down to new business, which there is one item in new business that was presented by Jamie Vanderwally, our Chief Portfolio Officer, on Tuesday evening. The administration is requesting the board's approval of innovation agreement amendments that will provide a one-year extension on innovation agreements for Phelan Leadership Academy at George Fisher School 93, Cold Spring School, Kendesi Academy at Joyce Kilmer School 69, and Global Preparatory Academy at Riverside School 44. Given the disruption of this year, the administration, as Jamie shared on Tuesday, won't be able to engage in our previously implemented renewal school quality review process. And we also don't want to further disrupt any school communities by moving forward with any sort of shift or termination of our current agreement. So as President O'Connor said, this would essentially allow us a hold harmless year and then give us the space next fall to go through our review process, at which time we would make a longer term recommendation regarding those partnerships. So we just ask the board's approval of those amendments for the one-year extension.
And on Tuesday, we discussed taking the four innovation agreements, amendments, as a single action. And I believe we do have consensus for doing so. So confirming that everyone is still okay with taking this action in a single motion.
I have something. This is Commissioner Gore.
Yes, Commissioner Gore.
Okay. I just have something I wanted to say before we take the vote. Is that okay? Or you want to do the vote and do it during comment? Do it during comment. I didn't know.
Yeah, why don't we'll take the motion and then open for comment, if that's okay.
Okay.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded Any discussion, Commissioner Gore?
Okay, yeah. I am going to vote yes for this innovation agreement recommendation tonight because it appears that a no would give them a 5-year automatically, and yes gives them the opportunity for them to be evaluated in a year for renewal of its agreement. Even though I know I won't be on the board to make the vote, I still want everyone to know that I care about our children receiving a high quality of instruction leading to quality education. But I feel that one of our schools, Cadesi, had some problems that were present before COVID and still would not warrant a second amendment at this time if the situation were different. So I just want that to be clear, that the second amendment for the Innovation Charter School Agreement, if the situation were different, I think would warrant some attention now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other further discussion?
Yes, this is Commissioner Slack.
Go ahead.
I would like to ask, so we're doing a 1-year extension for these schools. We're also not going to be evaluating any of our other schools with the SQR this year. Is that what we're saying?
That is correct. So we won't be implementing the renewal process, nor will we be going through our sort of traditional school quality review for the same reasons that we mentioned about the renewal process.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I also would like to say that I do have some concerns about some of these schools, but again, I will be voting yes, only because of the disruptions in the classrooms and the disruption with COVID. I do echo the same sentiments. Some of these schools are having some concerns even before COVID, but I'd be interested to know what the evaluation is going to be after the COVID to see what's really going on. So I will be voting yes, but I do will keep my eyes on these schools that are on this list. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Mulholland, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 6-0.
Thank you. Moving to item 9, closing comments. Does any commissioner wish to offer closing comments this evening? Commissioner Hawkins?
Thank you, President O'Connor. I just want to acknowledge last week's, and it's similar to Commissioners Slack and Gore as well, their comments, but just want to acknowledge the recent Marion County Public Health Order that we are all living or preparing to live by was incredibly just somber, I guess is the best way to put it. And you know, I've had the opportunity to be in community with and connect with families and parents and educators, and I continue to hear the words exhausted, anxious, stressed, and overwhelmed. I too am in the same boat as well. You know, I can tell you that my oldest daughter is devastated right now, you know, and I know that there's so many children across our school system, our family of schools that are devastated right now by this shift, because such a odd spring moving into an odd fall, you're back together in person, and then to see this shift. And so, you know, for some reason, the emotion that seems to kind of boil in me is just anger and frustration that, you know, when we think about the fact that as adults, collectively, we're failing our children, frankly, with our inability to wear our masks, practice social distancing, and things of that nature. Those efforts that protect our community and the public health of our neighbors and family members. And so, I can't not say that. I have to acknowledge the fact that we are in a difficult situation, and I just can't thank our educators, our school leaders, our administration, our parents. Can't thank you enough for just pushing through this challenging experience, and your resiliency is seen. And I just want to encourage you. I also hope that over this holiday, there's an opportunity to find some rest as well, because that is well deserved for you and your families. But again, I just want to thank you so much for all that you do and have do and will continue to do as we move into the holiday season and then into the early part of January 2021. And so I just wanted to make those remarks, and happy Thanksgiving.
Mr. Collins?
On behalf of the board and IPS family, I'd like to offer this memorial to Regina Hodges. Whereas Regina Hodges served the Indianapolis Public Schools for 17 years, whereas her years of service contributed positively and significantly to the Indianapolis Public School students. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of School Commissioners of the City of Indianapolis that the death of Regina Hodges be memorialized and that a copy of this memorial be sent to the members of her family. Ms. Hodges was known for her hard work, dedication, and vibrant personality. She was dedicated to her work, ensuring students and families were served and supported when they visited or called the campus. Ms. Hodges' service, commitment, and dedication to all will be missed.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Any other closing comments?
This is Commissioner Slack. I know that we did not have a board meeting or anything around Veterans Day, but I want to salute our veterans. I know it's late, but I want to salute them on their service to our country, and I want to say thank you to them as well. And I hope everyone has a healthy, safe holiday.
Thank you. Superintendent Johnson, your closing comments?
Thank you, President O'Connor. Very quickly, I'd like to remind our community that we will return to remote learning on Monday, November 23rd, under the direction of our Marion County Public Health Department. Our teams have been working tirelessly since this announcement to both continue to provide strong in-person instruction for our students who are attending at school, but to also prepare for a strong transition back to the remote learning environment. So families, please be sure that you've reviewed all information from your school so that you are ready to go on Monday morning. We will continue to offer breakfast and lunch student meals, as well as partner with Gleaners Food Bank to offer supplemental food boxes at a number of school sites, and information on those services is on our website at myips.org. We will also be launching student support network sites in collaboration with a number of community partners. More details on the locations and offerings can also be found on our website. Learning hubs for qualifying families will also be hosted again at 3 IPS school buildings. Families who qualify to attend our learning hubs will be directly contacted by district team members with the offer to take part in those hubs. During this time, we will do our best to stay connected and support our students and families. I'd ask again that our community please do their part to help us in getting our students back into schools as soon as we can and as safely as we can by wearing masks, practicing social distancing, and washing hands frequently. We know that many of us will celebrate the Thanksgiving holiday next week, and it will look different for those of us who are choosing to spend it away from our extended family members in an effort to keep us all more safe. It will definitely be difficult to be apart, but I deeply believe that a short-term sacrifice will lead to a longer-term benefit for all of us. Finally, in this season of gratitude, I want to share my sincere thanks and appreciation for our staff and all of the incredible ways that they have shown up for our families, our students, and one another during this time. I am deeply grateful to be a part of this team and deeply grateful for the work my colleagues do each day, both as a superintendent and as a parent of IPS. I wish everyone great rest and renewal over next week's holiday. Thank you.
As our superintendent's just done, I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, a safe Thanksgiving, a thoughtful Thanksgiving. I try to, as Commissioner Hawkins talked about it, I know we're in difficult times. I try to pause a little bit every morning and remember what I have to be thankful for in my own personal life and in my professional life. And I frequently think about the work we do and the work we get to do and the colleagues we get to work with, and I am thankful for all of that. So thank you all for the work you do. Our next scheduled meeting is our work session on Tuesday, December 8th at 6 p.m. in this room. Having completed all the items on our agenda, this meeting stands adjourned. Everybody, that was a